everybody for joining us. My name is Brian Rosenberg. I'm the founder of Gays with Kids. Gays with Kids is actually celebrating our 7th anniversary on March 21st. And we have been around for a while now, sharing stories about how queer men are creating families and raising families. I would say for the first 5.5 to 6 years, we did that mostly anecdotally, right? We had the dads themselves talking about what it was like for them to create a family, what it was like when they first held on to their babies or they first got their adopted child, and talk about what life is like for us once we are dads. And then we started to get a lot of people asking us, saying, it's great that you're sharing these stories with us, but we love it now if you can help us and go the next step, which is actually help us become dads. Let us know what's involved. Let us know what the options are, and let us meet the right partners that can help us out. And so almost a year ago, we actually launched a new website, and we have a section we call it the Becoming section, and that's the button on the top left of the website that really takes you through all the different paths of parenthood that are available typically to most queer men. And then once you choose the path to parenthood that's most interesting to you, whether it's adoption or surrogacy, then you could go to a separate page just on that path, and there's a ton of content. And really, we're really trying to make it as easy as possible for you by putting everything in one place. How we're getting this content is by working with experts, talking about people who've been doing this for a very long time. And not only are they experts doing this for a very long time in general, but specifically within the LGBTQ community. And I would say, so you can be very confident, you can feel very confident that when you're going to our website or you're attending one of our webinars, that you're getting people who are really, really knowledgeable and who, these are people you should be listening to and taking advice from. So without further ado, as a reminder, I guess I should have started by confirming that you are at the webinar where we hope to help you understand, how and why you'd want to consider a journey of surrogacy in the United States. So more specifically, the topics that we'll address during this webinar, we'll make sure you understand really what is surrogacy and what is in vitro fertilization. We want to make sure that you understand the different organizations and individuals you have to be working with as part of your team, and understand what each person's responsibilities are. We're really also going to share with you, the U.S., for countries that don't offer anything but altruistic surrogacy, the U.S. is really a popular destination to pursue surrogacy and probably one of the best options for you. And I'm going to let our panelists explain why. And then finally, we'll definitely want to share the legal considerations that you need to know about making an international surrogacy journey. All right. I said this, I like to say I created my family. My husband and I created our family through a combination of adoption and surrogacy. And I can tell you, each of them have complicated paths, and there's a lot involved in them. I can tell you that the true secret to success, for you to have the journey that's going to have the least hiccups, that's going to go more smoothly, and to be successful, is by really making sure you select the right family building partners. I mentioned earlier, the one consideration is certainly expertise and experience, not just in the industry, but specifically working with us and our community. Something else that I think is equally important there is that these people have to have a passion. They must be as passionate as I am about helping gay men create families. All right, so without further ado, whoops, this isn't working. Oh, there we go. I'm going to introduce you to Greg Zola, who is the Chief Marketing Officer of Gays with Kids. to make some announcements and logistics, and to introduce our speakers.
Hi, everybody. As Brian mentioned, my name's Greg Zola, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Gays with Kids. And my husband and I started our family through surrogacy. We have an egg donation. We have 2 children that keep us running, very busy, but very thankful too. It's an incredible journey, and so that's why we're here. You are all interested, and we have some really fantastic experts to speak to you on their topics of expertise. First up will be Dr. Jerry Goldstein, who is the founder and medical director for Fertility Specialists of Texas. And then Kristen Hansen is the co-owner and executive for and director of finance for Simple Surrogacy. And then Lauren Gatos Duffer, who is co-managing partner at Gatos Duffer law firm, and she is based in Texas. This whole crew actually is based in Texas, but they manage people's family building journeys from all over the world. So I'd like to pass it to Dr. Goldstein, who will speak to us next on surrogacy. Excuse me, on what is involved with an IVF clinic and why you need that.
Good afternoon, everybody. Again, I'm Dr. Gerald Goldstein. I'm the medical director and founder of Fertility Specialists of Texas. I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself and in terms of the clinic. We opened a clinic in 2005 and have do a lot of helping build families. One of the passions of mine is actually is helping gay men build families. And I think primarily, I know when I initially started this process, it was always amazing to me of the tremendous amount of emotional and financial energy that went into building a family. And that, so I wanted to make sure that we were able to provide that because I think that obviously for guys it involves more steps than typical, and it can be really complicated. But really, if you break things down in their individual components, then it is successful. And wanted to hopefully make that happen the first time. So again, we're located in Dallas, very centrally located location. We see patients obviously locally, nationally, and internationally. It's very easy to get to. And we have a good team in our facility. So the first thing that's really important to look at is the role and how does the IVF clinic play a role in this whole process. And from my perspective, it's actually where the magic happens. But it depends on having great partners in terms of egg donor agencies, or for example, if you're using an in-house egg donor, as well as surrogacy agencies and attorneys, because it's there's a lot of moving parts in the process. And so I think it's important not to underestimate that it's really a group process that results hopefully in the birth of a child. So one of the first steps that you would take in terms of beginning this process is really having a sperm count. And that can be done where you're at currently. I think it's really a good idea to at least to have that as a baseline. Very rarely is there an issue that would make it where you would not be able to have kids. It's a frequent question that I get, but really it's really, really very unlikely for that to happen. But at least if you have a baseline, then you know that things are good. And once you arrive at the clinic. So again, at our, you would have a semen analysis either done here at our facility. Certainly everybody would have that done before. However, now we are also working with some facilities that are not located here. I know that logistically with COVID that it's become more difficult to travel here. So we do have some affiliations with clinics that are in Europe where this can be done and actually transported to our facility here. So that's, a relatively straightforward part of it. I mean, when this is done, there are certain requirements for this to be done in the States, and that is that of having like a brief physical exam, and there's some infectious disease testing that really everybody has to undergo. The next step would really be blood test. And the blood test in particular would be, for example, genetic testing, that you might have genetic testing that would be helpful to identify if you happen to be a carrier for a genetic disease. It's really only important if, in fact, the egg donor, which is actually the other, which is going to be providing 50% of the genetic material for a pregnancy, also happens to be a carrier for that specific disease. So it is helpful, obviously, if you have that done initially, because if there is because in the course of picking out an egg donor, that it can, if you happen to have an egg donor that also happens to be a carrier for a recessive disease, then obviously you would not want to select her as an egg donor. The fertility clinic is also involved in screening the egg donor, as well as the surrogate screening. It's really where the medical screening occurs. And obviously we are in constant communication with you, because you want to know exactly the steps that the egg donor is going through, as well as the surrogates going through. And so you would be appointed a coordinator who would actually literally be holding your hand through the process. The clinic is also where, for example, genetic testing. Invariably, anybody at our facility really that's using a surrogate, it's very, very helpful. We very much recommend that there's genetic testing of the embryos, which is different than the initial testing that you would have and the egg donor would have, that basically tells you that the embryo is chromosomally normal, as well as the sex, if you would like to know that information. And a lot of times I'm finding that that surrogacy agencies are kind of using that. They want to know that you're well on your way to making embryos before they actually go through and start the process of helping you select a surrogate, because surrogates are ready to be pregnant. And so it's nice to know that you have genetically normal embryos. Obviously, the clinic is also where the embryo creation occurs. So obviously your sperm would either be transported to our facility, or hopefully that you're here and you get to see our beautiful facility that we have here in Dallas. But this is where we would get the eggs from the egg donor. The egg donor themselves doesn't necessarily have to be here. They can be monitored really. If they don't happen to be in Texas, they could be monitored in any outside facility, and then they would come to our facility for the retrieval, fertilization, and where the testing of the embryos would occur, and ultimately where the embryo transfer would occur. Lastly is obviously the storage. For example, the storage of the embryos does occur here at our facility. We have a number of different security systems in place. It's to make sure that the embryos are very safely kept. There's backup generators to make sure that we know that these are very valued possessions. And obviously, hopefully, when you have a child, and that you'll come back and have like a second child, and you won't be going through this whole process again. You'll have embryos frozen, and it's definitely a much easier process. So the IVF clinic plays a very important role in terms of helping to organize the process and to be communicating with the egg donor, if in fact you're using egg donor agencies, and certainly with the surrogacy agency. Next slide. So I know when you initially look at the process, it can seem very complicated, but if you break it down in these individual 5 steps, it makes it much simpler. And I kind of reviewed this when we just talked, but obviously that you would need to have it's nice to have a semen analysis before. If not, then certainly when you were here, you come in and we would do a semen analysis. We freeze your sperm at that time, as well as do a physical exam and some blood work testing. At that time, you would meet your coordinator, and that coordinator would be the one that would really be with you through the process. And it's going to be certainly we're available. I'm available to me, or Dr. Score is our other reproductive endocrinologist that really spends a lot of time involved in this process, who both of us are available at any time if you have any specific questions. But your coordinator would be who would be walking you through the process. After you've done that, really the next step is really picking out an egg donor. The egg donor is going to be the person that really is a very important part of the process because they're going to be contributing half of the genetic, material. And so there are a couple things to really keep in mind. One is that, for example, we have an in-house egg donor program, as well as we work with a variety of different agencies. So I always tell patients that, that obviously you're welcome to look at our egg donors. We've actually seen our donors and done some initial screening with our donors, but but the most important part is really what resonates with you. So certainly there are agencies that we can refer you to. From us, it doesn't matter whether you use one of our donors or an agency donor. We do the same type of screening for the egg donor. Couple of things to keep in mind when you're looking at egg donors are, one is if they've a proven donor. Proven donor is someone who's already gone through the process. It is worthwhile from the standpoint that you can get some idea of how many eggs they've made, how many of those fertilized, how many genetically normal embryos resulted, and whether there's a pregnancy. Now, while that's helpful information to have, everybody has to start somewhere. So, it's not like that you have to have a proven donor, but you are able to get that information, obviously, if you have a donor that's already gone through the process. Once you select a donor, it takes, we have to see the donor and do the extensive testing, which involves, having psychological testing, having blood work testing, drug screen, and they're screened very, very well. Once they go through this process, the last thing is the legal process, and that is where they sign a contract so they know that contractually those eggs are your property. And there's really never any issue with that. But that's basically the process that goes through in terms of with all egg donors. After we've done that and they've had the legal clearance, then comes the fun part. The fun part is really making the embryos. The egg donor is typically started on medications, fertility medications that involve them producing multiple eggs. So normally women produce one egg a month that they release. However, we want them to have multiple eggs, and typically we shoot between 10 to 25 eggs. During this time that they are taking this medication, which is really occurring really twice a day, they have blood work. They have blood work and ultrasound every 3 to 4 days, really, for a period of about 10 to 12 days. And then they come into our facility where under IV sedation, we aspirate the eggs. So your coordinator would typically keep you would know exactly where they are in the process, how many eggs you would expect. They've come in, they'd have the retrieval, which is done really under IV sedation, takes about 15 to 20 minutes. And then we would thaw the sperm that you had provided and fertilize the eggs. And that's either what we're doing, for example, oftentimes we might do split insemination if it's you and your partner, or it could just be your sperm itself. But we would fertilize those eggs, which then are embryos, and the embryos grow over a process of 5 to 6 days. Typically, after the eggs are fertilized, you're called the next day in terms of how many of those eggs are fertilized, and then you would typically be called on day 5 or day 6 for the final count in terms of the number of those embryos that make that are able to be biopsied. Those are biopsied, and typically about a week to 2 weeks later is when you would get a report, which would tell you how many of the embryos are genetically normal, as well as the sex, if you'd like to know that information. And like I said, that's a good place to be, because if you have genetically normal embryos, and we feel fairly confident that that your surrogate will get pregnant, hopefully on the first time, which is typically about 70% of the time, but if not, that's certainly if they had to go through another embryo transfer, which would happen. So we would, after we make embryos and you get a report and you know that it's genetically normal, then typically, and again, I think Kristen could really speak more to this, is that hopefully you're well on your way to picking out a surrogate. Even before you pick out a surrogate, the agencies typically would send us the information, and we would look over the information and make sure we don't see any issues. But we would then see the surrogate and go through the screening for the surrogate. Surrogates are typically women that are 21 to 40, that have previously had a healthy pregnancy, no history of diabetes or high blood pressure, that are very stable. And these are really women that are very invested in helping build families and very devoted to this process. But you would obviously be meeting the surrogate before and before we actually saw the surrogate, but we would do the medical screening of that. We do special screening to where we measure exactly where to place the embryos, and we do that a month before because we don't want to be in the middle of the embryo transfer and trying to really figure that out. So all that information, all that is done to really to optimize the chance that your surrogate will get pregnant the first time that you go through the process. Surrogates are then placed on hormones really to make sure their uterus is really at the optimum time for implantation. When you'll know really when the transfer is. It's nice certainly if you're here. Oftentimes we have surrogates that will FaceTime you during the transfer, where you can actually see the transfer. You can see a picture of the embryo before we do the transfer, watch it on the screen, and it's really an amazing process. But the transfers typically, are done. There's no anesthesia, and then 10 days later, there's a pregnancy test that's done. So, I know that when you look at the process or the journey, it seems like really complicated. But when you break things down in their components, then it works, and it's really an amazing process. Next slide. So this kind of outlines the steps that are involved in, for example, really ideally we like to see you here because one is that you're able to see our facility, you're able to meet us in person, and logistically it's easier, but certainly we know that now there are some that it's a bit more difficult with COVID, which hopefully is definitely getting better, assuming that as more people get vaccinated. But we do have affiliations with other centers in Europe, whereby that you would be able to collect sperm as well as do the blood work testing there, and have that sent to our facility. So that this would be something that really would be worked out with our coordinator that would kind of help you decide whatever what made sense. Our goal really is to make things as simple as can be, but also that we want to make sure that we are able to maintain a high success rate, because we know that there's a lot of tremendous amount of energy, and and it's an expensive process, and so we really want it to work the first time. Again, certainly I know that after this presentation, if you'll have any specific questions with me or Dr. Scora, then certainly you can certainly email us or talk to our coordinator, and we could set up a time to talk one-on-one and go through the process to hopefully make this really a reality for you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Goldstein. So just quickly, I want to remind you, I put on the Q&A function or the chat function. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask us. You can use either the Q&A tool or the chat tool. We'll likely respond to those questions at the last half an hour, which is when we host our Q&A. As a reminder, if you have a question that you come up with after the webinar is over, send it to dads@gayswithkids.com, and we'll make sure to share it with one of our experts in the industry, and we'll get back to you on that. So next up is Kristen Hansen from Simple Surrogacy. Kristen, thanks so much for joining us. Do you want to take on the next slides?
Thank you, Brian. I really appreciate it. And so I'm here to talk about the role of your surrogacy agency in your journey, and what things that you will be using your surrogacy agency to streamline for you. So obviously there's a lot of places internationally that you can undertake a surrogacy journey, but the US is really positioned well to help you for many reasons. Primary among those is our medical care and our legal system and our agency system are the tops in the world. And what that means is you're going to get top-notch medical care, ensuring that in most cases you're going to get pregnant on the first time that you transfer into your surrogate. And the laws and the attitudes of the country are really pro surrogacy in the United States. So you're going to have a really smooth, streamlined journey because the legal is going to be in place and people's attitudes about surrogacy are really in line with what you're looking for here in terms of your journey. And so there's many things that the agencies will do here to assist you with your surrogacy journey. So the first thing that an agency does is they're going to match you with a screened and well-supported surrogate. So all surrogates in the United States are screened in many different ways. We get copies of all their previous pregnancy records, and we take those and we send them to a reproductive endocrinologist who makes sure that they are uniquely qualified to be a surrogate again. That means they've had healthy pregnancies and deliveries. They're going to be psychologically screened to make sure there are no issues with them mentally being a surrogate. We're going to run a background check and a legal and credit report on them and make sure there's no criminal history or any kind of credit history that would impair them from being an excellent surrogate. And they're going to be psychologically screened to make sure their attitudes are in the right places. So there's a lot of different components that go into making sure a surrogate is well qualified before you even see their profile. And a surrogacy agency can be thought of as your wedding planner, if you will, for your entire surrogacy journey. That is, they're the clearinghouse and the kind of start and finish of your process. They're going to bring you in and have you do your profile and make sure your profile is excellent to be sent out to a surrogate. They can match you with an egg donor in most cases. They're going to make sure that your surrogate has insurance that will cover her pregnancy and delivery, or if she doesn't, they're going to assist you with getting her health insurance. They can provide you with many other types of insurance, such as lost wages insurance, disability insurance, loss of organs insurance, hospital indemnity policies, and an accidental death policy to cover your surrogate in any situation that might arise during the surrogacy and really help limit your financial exposure during the process. And they can provide you with legal and escrow references, and in our case, manage your escrow account and refer you to experienced, excellent attorneys who are going to make sure that your pre-birth order process or whatever birth order process that your country needs are handled really well and very smoothly. So you're not going to have any bumps where you don't have the legal rights to the child. An agency will also be able to coordinate your medical providers and make sure that everyone is going to be top notch in their field to ensure that you get pregnant the first time around and that when your surrogate is released to her OBGYN, that your care is really well taken care of. And they're going to help you prepare for the birth and the travel at home. Here at our agency, we can provide to you many things that will help while you're in country, such as child seats and pack and plays, references for nannies, insurance or direct pays for pediatricians while you're in the country, as well as assistance getting you passports, getting your birth certificates, and getting your child back easily to your country. So it's really kind of an end-to-end coordination for your entire journey. Next slide. And so the average surrogacy journey takes 18 to 24 months. And that's really from about the time that you're matched to the surrogate. Matching times currently are around 6 months, depending on if you're going to do a single embryo transfer or double embryo transfer. And so the first part of your journey is going to identify where your egg is coming from. And so you're going to want to locate either an egg donor or eggs that have already been collected and are being stored at an egg bank. And so there are a lot of different ways to find an egg donor. You can have an egg donor from a relative or a friend. You can have an anonymous egg donor. You can have an agency egg donor. You can have a clinic egg donor, and you can have a known donor from any one of those sources. And so a known donor is someone that you exchange information with. So you would know her name and email address and possibly address, and she would know the same about you. An anonymous egg donor, you really just know her by number and you don't get to know much more about her. You would get to see pictures and have identifying information about her learning history, her education, her preferences, and her personality. And so those are some choices that you want to make when you're selecting an egg donor. If you're choosing eggs that have already been retrieved from a bank, you're going to have the least amount of information available. So you might not get to see them in video, and you might not get to have an interview or a call with them. You would really just get the information that the egg bank has on file. And so it says, what are the optimal characteristics of an egg donor? And that is really a personal preference question. So other than health, for which all surrogates and egg donors are screened for, you're really just going to want to look for someone that aligns with what you're looking for, personality wise, talent wise, interest wise, just keeping in mind that those things all don't necessarily translate into your child. But those are things that you're looking for when you're choosing an egg donor based on your preferences. And of course, physical characteristics are often a preference, such as height, weight, egg and eye color, and hair color. And so a surrogate is the more complicated part of the process. You're going to find a surrogate generally through an agency. And surrogates are all screened, as I said before, for psychological background check. They're thoroughly interviewed, their home environment is evaluated, and their medical records are evaluated to ensure that they are ideal candidates to carry your baby, both physically and mentally. Surrogates are matched for preferences and personality. And so that means that just because you're next in line for a surrogate and she's next in line doesn't mean you'll necessarily match. We match for preferences and personality, meaning that you're going to want to talk to this person about things other than just the surrogacy and the birth, and hopefully form a friendship throughout your journey. And so we're going to look at things like termination stance, communication preferences, locations, and things that your country may or may not require, such as being a single surrogate or being located in a particular state, or being willing to sign certain paperwork for your country. And so those are the things that we're going to look at when we're matching you with a surrogate candidate. Okay. And so the case for pursuing surrogacy in the United States. So surrogacy is not well regulated in Scandinavian countries and a lot of other countries over in Europe. And in most cases, surrogacy is illegal, with some exceptions to traditional surrogacy. Traditional surrogacy is where the surrogate acts as both egg donor and a surrogate. So she does have a genetic relationship to your child. In the United States, that is generally not practiced because it is a more legally complicated process. And I'm sure it is as well in Scandinavian countries. The US is widely considered to be the most favorable country for surrogacy due to its favorable legal, societal, and medical conditions. We have the top medical care in the world, and so that means to you that you're going to get pregnant, generally speaking, on the first transfer of embryos to your surrogate, which saves you time and money. And you're also going to have really advanced medical care should your surrogate need anything additional during her pregnancy and delivery. Societally, we are very welcoming to LGBTQ individuals, and a lot of surrogates enroll in surrogacy specifically to help gay couples have children, because they really strongly believe that everyone deserves a family. So your surrogate here is going to be very favorable to partnering with you on the surrogacy journey. Legally speaking, depending on the state in which your surrogate delivers, the laws here are very favorable to being able to have you be the legal parents from birth and not need to do a step parent adoption or a post-birth order. Everything can be handled before the birth with an ease of process, so that once the baby is born, you can concentrate on getting the birth certificate and getting back over to your country to become citizens of your country with your child. And so there are many reputable LGBTQ surrogacy agencies and IVF clinics, and we ourselves have 20 years of experience helping LGBTQ plus couples create their families. And so when you're coming over to the United States for surrogacy, that should not be a consideration, because almost every agency here and every clinic here really does work with LGBTQ plus couples predominantly, and really is aware of the process necessary to get you to having a family. And so we do advise also that you connect with an attorney in your home country. You can generally travel back on a US passport with your child, but you're going to want to speak with an attorney in your home country so that we can make sure all the legal documents here in the US align with what you need in your country, so that you can easily get citizenship for your child or children when you go back.
Thank you, Kristen. Lauren, I guess you're up next.
Thank you. Well, first I'd like to start with following up with what Dr. Goldstein said in the very beginning about this being a team effort. And that really is one of the most important things about making your journey seamless. And we want this to be such a great experience. I've been fortunate enough since 2006 to work with Dr. Goldstein and Kristen. What started out as about 20% of my practice is now about 90% of what I do every day is working with families creating their families through surrogacy or egg or sperm donation or embryo donation. And we've really seen it take over in the United States to the point that adoption is almost becoming something that's unheard of. So we've been very fortunate that with all of the advances in medicine in the United States and the laws, that it has become such a popular option for families. So surrogacy in the United States is really regulated differently in every single state, and it's not even just in the states, then it's broken down by the counties. So every state has different laws in the United States, but even once you find a state that might be surrogate friendly, you need to consider what county the legal proceedings would be filed in. There is a website with a really wonderful map that does set out kind of the current state of every state's laws regarding single intended parents, or same gender couples, whether or not you need to be married. If you're interested in getting a copy of that and you send me an email, I'm happy to send it out to you if you are considering a surrogacy in any of the states in the United States. Typically, what we do see is that we will be basing your surrogacy journey on the laws of the state where the surrogate does reside. And so it is important that you do have an understanding of the laws of that particular state, but you do need to know what the laws of your home country are. So one of the things that my law firm requires is when you do sign up with me, you are required to give me the name of an attorney you have already talked to in your home country, that they have already told you what I need to do. Because while Texas may tell me that I can accomplish getting you an order and do a surrogacy arrangement that's protected, your home country may not, or they may need me to have the birth certificate done in a different way. And so I need to know those things from the very beginning, because what we don't want to do is do something that would affect any benefits your child would receive in your home country, you being recognized as a parent in your home country, or the citizenship or ability to get home. Next slide, please. So most states do permit surrogacy. So in the United States, when we say that, what does that mean? So it may mean that some states have actual surrogacy laws. It may mean that a state takes cases that have been decided by the court in that state and have interpreted that surrogacy is protected. Now, we do have states that don't permit surrogacy. So for example, in the United States, Michigan is not a state that you want to do surrogacy in. In fact, Michigan, they do have a surrogacy law, but it's a law specifically against surrogacy that says that any compensated surrogacy is considered to be criminal. And the people that are subject to that criminal penalty are the intended parents, the attorneys, the agency, everybody that's involved. So that is not a state that you want to pick a surrogate from. We have seen that a lot of states in the United States have moved towards being in favor of compensated surrogacy. So in February, New York did finally pass a statute that did allow you to have compensated surrogacy, where before they did not have one. In our gestational agreements, we do list all of the really bad states as places that our surrogates are not able to travel to, because we do not want our intended parents having to deal with a state that would not be positive for them. People are often surprised to find out that Texas has really good laws regarding surrogacy. So we are a state that has an actual law that says that if you are doing a gestational surrogacy, that is protected by the law. You are the parents of any child that may be born to you. People are also surprised to learn that California, they do case law interpretation. So their courts have made decisions about surrogacy. And so the attorneys there have taken the decision of the courts and interpreted that to mean that surrogacy is permissible and that the intended parents are the parents. So not every state is treated equal. So it is really, really important that you do understand, is there a statute for the state that I'm looking to do my surrogacy in? Is it case law interpretation, or is there no law at all? There are several states that have absolutely no guidance whatsoever. So what does that mean for our intended parents that are trying to do surrogacy in those states? It really is that I can't tell you what could happen. It could be that the court may find that you're the parent, or they may have a problem. And even when it comes down to the states, it also is about the county that you file things in. So in Texas, for example, we always file everything in Dallas County. The reason that we do that is that I've been practicing in Dallas County for a very long time. They were actually one of the first counties to grant a pre-birth order for one of our same-gender married couples, even before the Supreme Court of the United States required them to get equal recognition as our heterosexual couples. And they've always been very supportive of parenting, no matter what that may look like. Now, there are some small towns in Texas, and recently Kristen and I had a very bad experience with another county where even the attorney thought that they did not have to follow the court order that was issued out of Dallas. So you do have to be careful about making sure that you have an attorney that knows what the judges in that county may do. They know what counties are favorable so that it is a good process for you. So when we talk about what does this process look like, at least in the Texas perspective, because that's the only state I'm licensed in, I can tell you we tell our intended parents to break it down as a 3-part process. So our first part is getting our gestational agreement done. So typically what happens is once Kristen has matched you with your gestational carrier, she has this wonderful match sheet that she has everybody sign off on that says that this is the understanding on the financial compensation. This is our understanding about how the escrow account will be funded, who will be paying for the health insurance. She's already done a background through a third party about the insurance. So everything is on that match sheet. That match sheet comes to me, and I take that match sheet and I put it into a contract that then sets everything out in much more detail. And then we include lots of different other provisions about when you would want a termination of the pregnancy, a reduction of the pregnancy, things that your surrogate is prohibited from doing throughout the term of the agreement, future contact and what that may look like, all of that stuff. Once my draft of the gestational agreement is done, it goes to my clients. We do a review. Once it's a perfect picture of what you thought you were agreeing to, we send it to your surrogate's attorney. They review and contact us if they have any changes. Once everybody's agreed on the terms, we would move to what we call step 2. That's where we would get the pre-birth order that would say that you are the parents of any child that would be born and that your names are to go on the birth certificate. So right when your child is born, the law would recognize you as the parents. You would make all medical decisions. We wouldn't need to do an amendment of the birth certificate unless your home country did require something different where we could not put both of you on the initial birth certificate. That process is typically done once we know we have a viable pregnancy. I will say in Texas, our laws are written in a way that it does say until the court gives me that order, even though you've entered into a gestational agreement or a contract about this, that contract's not valid until the court looks at it and says that we did everything that Texas law requires us to. It's all included in that document, and they do find it to meet the requirements and be a valid and enforceable order. So most of our clients do wait till they have a confirmation of pregnancy to actually get the pre-birth order, but we always advise that there is a legal risk because until you get it, again, the courts in Texas don't view it as an enforceable order until they've given it their stamp of approval. Once your baby's born, then you let me know that, yes, we've had a child. This is my child's name, where they were born and when. And we are required to file what's called a notice of birth. We let the court know, yes, a baby was in fact born pursuant to that initial order that you issued. And then we get a second order that just reconfirms the intended parents are in fact the legal parents of the child. It really is more just kind of an administrative step because we've already had that pre-birth order that says you're the parents, but it just lets the court again know that yes, in fact, there was a child born pursuant to this, and these are the parents of the child. The laws and the cases are constantly evolving and changing. Again, in every state, it's almost impossible for every attorney to keep up with what everyone's doing. So it is important that you find an attorney that is involved in different organizations regarding surrogacy. So there's some professional organizations that attorneys that practice in this area are involved in. And the great thing about that is we have an entire network of resources that are able to let us know kind of what our clients are up against if they're looking to do a surrogacy in a state that we're not licensed in. So the court orders, they do vary depending on what's required to be in there. So that does again depend on your home country and if there's something specific that you are needing me to have in that order in order to get your baby home. It can also vary kind of depending on the states. So for example, I know we started out saying that typically we do use the laws of the state where your gestational carrier resides, but in the last 2 weeks, I've had 2 different situations where we have ended up having to have the gestational carriers go to the states where the intended parents reside for different reasons. And then we've had to have Texas issue an order to try to bind the state where they delivered, which was not their home state. And so we've had to tweak our court orders to meet the requirements of those other states as well, so that the states would recognize an order that Texas did issue. By virtue of giving birth in the United States, your child is given U.S. citizenship. And so that's something that we always want to make sure that if there's anything special we need in order to get your child home, to get citizenship in your home country, that we have definitely complied with that as well. Next slide. So my job and Kristen's job and Dr. Goldstein's job is to make sure that you get home with a baby. And we want you to be able to get home as easy as possible in the shortest amount of time without you having any kind of complications. Again, going back to that whole team approach, it's so important that you are working with people that do know what they're doing. And really, I will tell you, it makes a huge difference if they've worked together before. So I do know almost everybody at Dr. Goldstein's office and Kristen's, and we've worked together for such a long time that we are really able to work through any kind of hurdles if anything is thrown our way. It's important that our contract does meet any requirements that your home country may have. We want to make sure that if something does happen to you, or in the event of this whole pandemic where we've had travel restrictions that prevented our intended parents from being able to travel to take possession of their child, we have the appropriate guardianship documents in place. So I know initially when the pandemic hit, Kristen and I were kind of in a tailspin because we had lots of intended parents that were on their way or planning to come soon for their deliveries that were then prevented from doing so. So we were able to work together to get guardianship forms put in place, and we were able to find third parties that were able to take possession of children until our intended parents could get here under all of the travel guidelines. We really try to start the pre-birth order at least by, for us, we like to say once we know it's a viable pregnancy, you need to reach back out to us and let us know and get your payment in and get me any information that I may need so that we can get things going. Because I do so many of these, we do get a little bit of preference with the Dallas County courts. And so they're pretty good about getting me pre-birth orders real quick. So if your surrogate does go into labor before we were expecting, and we're still trying to get everything together, we've been pretty lucky so far to be able to get things turned around real quick. The post-birth process, it does include getting your birth certificate, getting your passport, and all of your travel documents put in place. For the birth certificate, again, we are able in Texas to get both intended parents on the birth certificate as long as you are in fact a married couple. In the event that your home country does not want to see that from us, then we are able to go about it in other ways. So I always tell everybody, again, it's so important that we know what your home country is looking for from us. If they need to see that your surrogate's name goes on the birth certificate, then part of our post-birth order does include a clause that says that the birth certificate would be amended to remove her name from the birth certificate and to amend the birth certificate. So we're able to do that even just with the post-birth order if you do need the initial birth certificate to reflect her name.
Lauren, thank you very much for that. And we have a lot of questions that have come up in the chat and the Q&A. So I would like to jump right in and get to them so we can answer as many as we can before the end of the hour. So the first is from Patrick, if I've pronounced that right, excuse me if I haven't. And how hard is the process for women donating the eggs? And is it reasonable to ask someone or is it real effort? Does it have a major impact on the woman helping out? To any of you.
I can jump in and answer that question. I've been an egg donor 3 times. So I kind of have a pretty intimate knowledge of what it takes to be an egg donor. I don't think it's that complicated of a process. I think what would be complicated if you're an international parent is where to do that egg retrieval. We've had several international parents who want to use a friend or a relative, for example, in Australia. And so the easiest thing to do is to have that person come over to the United States. Of course, that's easier said than done during a pandemic, but to have that person come over and do the actual donation at the clinic that's going to be fertilizing the embryos. We find it's really best to keep everything in one location. But as far as timing and difficulty, it's really not that much of an uncomfortable process. You take shots for about 3 weeks, and then you go in and you're sedated and your eggs are retrieved. I'm sure Dr. Goldstein can speak to a little bit more of the process. I was asleep for most of it when I did it. So, but really, it's just about a month of your friend's life, really, to donate eggs. And it's not very painful. There's the small shots for a few weeks. It's not really that invasive. So if there is someone that you're thinking of asking, I think that is a great route to go. It does save money over egg donor fees, even if you pay her expenses and things. But I think Dr. Goldstein can speak a little bit more to the actual medical process, but I didn't find it to be too invasive. Obviously, I did it 3 times. So.
Dr. Goldstein,
Dr. Goldstein, if you want to add anything.
I think that, that, excuse me, when women come in, we obviously, we talk to them about what's involved in the procedure, and we have a special obligation really to egg donors, even almost at a higher level than we do to patients that are just coming in and getting pregnant because of the fact that they're young and because they're egg donors, and they really are depending on us to make sure that to not take advantage of them, which I think a lot of people, oftentimes you may hear, but the process is safe. There's really does not have any adverse effect on their future fertility. There's no higher risk of ovarian cancer, for example, when you look at egg donors. And so they are very motivated. They understand the process. And like Kristen was saying, that the medications are, they're subcutaneous injections that come like in a little pen. And over a 10 to 12 day process, they have, they go through the stimulation. And once we, excuse me, I don't know what's going on in my voice, but once we get the eggs, and basically they'll have a period about 10 days later, and they're really back to what they were doing before. So oftentimes that's why you often, we have repeat donors 2, 3, 4, 5 times really. And I think that they enjoy doing it, and they otherwise really probably would not continue doing that.
Thank you, Dr. Goldstein. There was a question about pros and cons working with an agency in somebody's own country or the US. And I do want to preface that by saying, and then toss it to the experts, that the US has a very strict FDA, and success rates are really important. And there's an organization in the US called SART. Dr. Goldstein, you all can tell me what that is, Society for Assisted Reproductive Technology. And it lists the success rates for the clinics. And that is something to dive into to make sure that the providers that you're going through are going to have a better chance of succeeding first try. That involves a lot of science and coordination and so forth. But tossing it to you, Dr. Goldstein.
So yeah, there is in the US, it was understood that that patients are really relying on physicians and clinics to be truthful and about what their numbers really are. And so there's a law that was passed in the US that basically mandated that we have to report our success rates for patients that are going through IVF for any given year. And that includes all the way the patients that have a pregnancy as well as a live birth. So actually, once when surrogate delivers or a patient has delivery, then we record that. And so that's actually important information to know, because I think that I'm certainly a strong believer in that the real deal is really having a baby. And not obviously, you want to go to a place where the office is nice and things like that, but ultimately you want to make sure that they have a history of producing success. And so SART is an independent organization that basically you can compare us to really to clinics anywhere in the, in the country, regarding what their success rates are going going through IVF. And I would encourage everybody to look at those, numbers year by year.
Okay. Further to that, I think the question was, like, for instance, in Sweden, it's not legal, but rather coordinating agency who assist with bridging the countries with the process in the US.
So you don't need an agency in Sweden, you need an attorney in Sweden. So if you're located in Sweden, you would be able to use a US agency to facilitate the whole process here. And then you just would need to consult with a Swedish attorney to find out how to make those children citizens once they get back to your country. Because when they're born, they'll be citizens of the US here and be able to travel back to Sweden on the US passport that would be issued for them. And so then you really just need to figure out with your Swedish attorney what exactly would be necessary over there. And we assist all of our clients with all of that paperwork. For example, different countries have different requirements. In China, they need originals of all the documents, including the gestational surrogacy agreement and, the agency agreement. And so we're able to get hard copies of those to you. In the UK, they need different affidavits signed after the birth of the child. We can assist with all of that. We really just need you to speak to a Swedish attorney in your country so that we can make sure to get them the paperwork they need to make your child a citizen once they get back over there.
Okay, and Kristen, another question this regards, is it feasible or advisable using eggs from a relative of one of the fathers to be, like maybe the sister?
We do see a lot of people doing that. And the same situation would be, I would advise having that retrieval happen, if at all possible, in the US at the clinic that you're going to use to transfer the eggs and create the embryos. You can have those shipped, but I'm sure Dr. Goldstein can speak to this from his experience. We've seen a lot of issues where if embryos are created at one clinic and frozen a certain way and shipped a certain way and thawed at another clinic, sometimes if there's an issue, everybody points fingers at everybody else. So it was the freezing process, it was the thawing process, it was the shipping process. And so it's really an ease of streamlining, if it's at all possible, to keep everything happening at the same clinic. But definitely we see a lot of people using a sister or an aunt or a niece of one of the fathers, and then the sperm from the other father to make, genetically related to both people. We do see that happen a lot.
One thing that I would mention, it's interesting. I see one of the questions here was, can you mention some successful surrogacies from the Nordic, from the Nordics? And actually, it's interesting. I shouldn't have. I actually looked at my email just in the middle of this presentation. There's actually a couple from Oslo that somebody sent me their email just now that I would be happy. Obviously, we would have to get their information in terms of if they're okay with being able to talk to you about the process. He just delivered here in a suburb of Dallas that I assume would be really happy to talk to you about the process in terms of successful journeys from Norway, in terms of the logistics and how it worked and stuff like that.
Well, I can also speak from the perspective of Kristen, and I've done several. And so we have we have a couple now that's on a second journey.
Right. I just saw that you sent that contract over, Lauren. Thank you for that. But yes, we do have a lot from Scandinavian countries that would certainly be happy. We have a list of references that we send out to people, and among them are many Scandinavian couples. So.
Okay, thank you. Another question. Shall the intended parents who apply for, let's see if I understand this correctly, shall IPs applied for baby Scandinavian passport in the respective embassy or consulate in US, or to remove complication of applying in the home country?
That's an interesting question. We have not yet had anyone do that, just because it's easier to travel back on the US passport and figure everything out when you're at your home. We've seen most people don't want to stay in the US longer than they need to. People want to get back to their lives and to their countries and to their jobs. And so, given that it's going to take 3 to 4 weeks anyway in the United States, most people don't want to wait and apply later, would rather wait and apply in their home country for their passports. But I'm sure that you'd be able to get that passport. If you wanted to apply here, that's certainly something you could do and we could assist with. But most people choose to travel back on the US passport.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. Lauren, quick question. Would you suggest to have the surrogate mother's name in the birth certificate, or maybe later adjust by removing her name from the certificate?
So I would say that really depends on your home country and what they want to see. Normally, the easiest thing is for the intended parents to go on there and not have to do any kind of amendment. But there are countries that do want to initially see the surrogate's name on the birth certificate, and we're required to then do an amendment. But I know, at least in Norway, our previous experience was that both of the intended parents went on there, and we did not put the surrogate on there. And the other issue with it being is if we're doing the pre-birth order in Texas, it says she's not the parent. So when she delivers at the hospital, they probably will not put her on there. There's ways to get her on there, but it requires a much different legal process.
Thank you, Lauren. One last question, and we do want to be respectful of everybody's time. We're a minute over, but I'm going to throw this rather difficult question out, and hopefully that can be the last. And for those questions that we didn't get to, we will try to email everybody those questions and responses that we can get answers from the crew of experts on this webinar. So this last question is, are there any guarantees for getting a healthy baby? And what if the baby has significant issues, and who decides about abortion or not? Tough question.
That is a tough question.
I mean, I can say that from, that we're involved up until we do an embryo transfer, cardiac, ultrasound where there's cardiac motion. And we know that if we've done genetic testing for the embryo, that it's genetically normal. In other words, that there's 46 chromosomes. But there are other reasons of why a baby cannot be developed normally in utero. And sometimes that's not really determined until later on in the course of the pregnancy. So that would be, from my perspective, that would be a discussion typically after they're seeing the OBGYN. The OBGYN, if they had a concern, then they typically refer them to a maternal fetal medicine doctor, who would be a doctor to give a second opinion that has to be very sure, or to be relatively sure in terms of exactly if there's a syndrome or what's going on. And then obviously there would be a recommendation in terms of whether they felt like that, it was something that would be, a termination would be an option. I think Kristen would probably have a much better deals with that area much more than I do, because from our perspective, they're actually in the OB's hands.
Yeah, so as Lauren would tell you, you cannot legally require anyone to have an abortion or termination. It is always the woman's choice. However, we do like to match for that preference. So we do ask that question during the matching process of what things would you be willing to terminate for? And if at what point during the pregnancy were those discovered, would you be willing to terminate? And so if that's a preference that you have, that you would want your surrogate to terminate for certain, life-threatening or terminal diseases that would happen to the baby, then that's something we're going to put in your profile and make sure that the surrogate does agree to those things. And it would be written into your contract that she agrees to terminate for those things. So if at any point she decided not to terminate, then she would be in violation of the contract, and you would not have to continue to pay for her to have that surrogacy journey. It's pretty rare that someone would agree to it and then decide not to do it later. So that's an important preference that we make sure everyone is on the same page for right at the beginning. So generally speaking, the intended parent makes all those decisions, but we do get the surrogate's buy-in beforehand and put that in the legal contract.
Thank you, Kristen. And I wanted to wrap this webinar, thank our experts, Dr. Goldstein and Kristen and Lauren. And the follow-up email that you'll be receiving has links to all of their contact information. We will be, again, for those who joined later, we will be sending an email with a recording of this webinar to you, along with hopefully the answers to the questions that we didn't get to. So thank you all very much for listening to the Gays with Kids webinar on pursuing surrogacy in the U.S. And we wish you all the best on your family building journey.
It was great having you here with us. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for having us.
See y'all.